Ecocentric evolution and design strategies. We're honored to have the opportunity to sit down with the renowned researcher, author, speaker, trainer, and community member, Diana Leafe Christian.
Wow, thank you.
Diana has focused her career on studying the topic of intentional communities and ecovillages. She travels internationally to conduct research, speak at conferences, facilitate skill development trainings, and to offer consultation to individuals and communities around the world. Mm-hmm. Diana has been pursuing the question of what makes some communities survive and thrive, while the majority of them fail or never can get off the ground.
Well, wait, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
I mean the majority of brand new ones, just getting started.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't mean that intentional communities in general fail.
Right,
That's
definitely.
all I meant.
Yeah, and looking at your book, we understood that you mean that 90% don't even actually get off the ground. And you've written 2 books that help compile in a very accessible way some of these research findings. And these books are Creating a Life Together, Practical Tools to Grow Ecovillages and Intentional Communities, and Finding Community, How to Join an Ecovillage or Intentional Community, both of which are foundational texts in the work of community development.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're so grateful to be here with you. Thank you for letting us come to your home. And we're sitting here at Earthaven Ecovillage, where Diana is a long-term member. So we're grateful
So
to
thank
have
you
this
so much for having us.
Actually, the honor is mine. I really appreciate that you stopped here on your national trip to Earthaven to see me, so thank you.
Of course, yeah, it's interesting. We met almost a year ago now at a vision fast, and during that time we started to connect around our ideas of like the world we knew was possible. You know, about this, we've been living in this story of separation. We need to find the story of connection and belonging and interbeing and healing. And so we were like, we should travel around the world and study ecovillages. And so the first thing I did was like research that, and I actually found your work. I was like, wow, someone has done literally what we've talked about, of course, you know, and your work was really amazing, and I just started to dive into it, and now I have it as like a manual for when we start, as we're laying foundations. We've already done part of it, which is like right up, you know, our visionary, you know, phase and whatnot. But we're here at Earthaven, and for our viewers and listeners, could you describe us a little bit about what is Earthaven? What is being built here? What is your role here in Earthaven? How do you participate? And your larger work in the world. You know, what do you do?
Okay, thank you. Let me make sure I've got your list of ever-escalating questions. What is Earthaven? How does it function? What's my role here, member? And what's my larger work in the world?
Yes. Exactly.
So we'll go from little to big concentric circles. Okay. Earthaven is an eco-village project started by founders 25 years ago. We have 329 acres. We're in the forested mountains of rural western North Carolina, about 50 or 60 minutes from the small, very cool town of Asheville, North Carolina. Our closest little city is the artsy art gallery city of Black Mountain. And so about 80 of us live here. Around 50 are members or becoming members, and the rest are work exchangers, long-term residents who might become members and probably will, and visitors and people renting for a short time because they'd like to check us out or because they'd like to live here. Our mission and purpose is, like so many ecovillages that you have and will be visiting, which is to learn what works well and to learn as we go. Ecological sustainability. And we're not good at it, we're learning how to do it. So when we find things that don't work, we share that with people too on our tours and in our classes. And social sustainability. How do we get along well, be excellent, great neighbors who help each other, have governance and decision making that is beneficial and feels good, and we get our work tasks accomplished and achieve our goals? How do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Social sustainability. Social sustainability also means having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Social activities and events and fun stuff that we do together and with our neighbors, our near close neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're rural, we have to learn economic sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make a living this far up the mountain, this far away from
Mm-hmm.
town, with slow internet? Multiple different ways people have learned and created for themselves how to make a living here, which sometimes means having multiple small income streams here and close by. And sometimes it means having a natural job, and sometimes it means you own your own set of entrepreneurial projects and you get money that way. So we're doing pretty well, in my opinion, through the phases we've had of dreadful, horrible conflict and difficulties, and then learning what works better, social sustainability, right? And now I actually think we're kind of like being in paradise. I think living here is like living in paradise. And and it's hard won. We had to learn how. We co-created together our ongoing shared group learning. How do you do this thing that American culture not only doesn't teach you how to do, but teaches you out of?
Right, exactly. It programs the opposite.
Exactly. Look at the dog-eat-dog, zero-sum win-win rat race culture that we are raised in and told is normal. And then when people who can feel their inner, I call it gene for community, hey, wasn't I evolved to live with other people in social groups, whether hunter-gatherings or small agricultural enterprises? How come I'm living an isolated, alienated life here in mainstream culture where I drive on little tracks between work and home and work in the mall, which I use for entertainment, and I buy things in order to have a better life, then after I've bought that thing, I still want to buy another thing. How do we change all that? How do we live the simple, peaceful life of friends and neighbors where everybody feels like your brother and your sister and your cousin and you help each other out? Well, that's what it's like now. So in order to be sharing with others what we do, we have classes and workshops and tours, and you had a tour this morning. And we just want to welcome people and say, listen, let us help you see what we're doing. Let us tell you what we've learned that does and doesn't work. The not work is as important as the does work. And let us, if we can, inspire you and suggest you and show you things that you can do yourself in your own life. And maybe you want to go live in an eco-village. Maybe you want to join this one. Maybe you want to start your own. Maybe you don't want to do that, but you're going to live a pretty content life in that city, starting the shared meals, the babysitting co-op, the recycling center, and the community garden network, where you are creating community energy where you live. So that's us. Okay, I get to live here.
Yes.
But in addition to getting to live here, which would be blessing enough, I get to work in my favorite topic with my favorite kind of people, traveling to my favorite kind of places, which is eco-villages, co-housing communities, housing co-ops, shared group houses in cities, and rural homesteading communities, and gay and lesbian communities, and artist co-ops, and all the different kind of communities which I get to visit, partly because I go visit them, and partly because I get hired to be a workshop presenter or a consultant to the community. And there's kind of a free flow, a kind of a mutually reinforcing, mutually flowing thing. I learned, I learned a whole lot about communities by all these visits. And I'm able to share what I've learned from other communities about what works well. What works well and help a person and a community do what they're doing effectively and with the most amount of goodwill and good neighborliness and the least amount of pits of hell.
Right. Yeah. We want to avoid those.
The least amount of that.
Yeah.
And the most amount of delight. And it is possible. There's things communities can do.
Yeah.
Definitely. We've heard you talk about almost being a surfer and riding this wave of intentional community and eco-village coming into more consciousness. Yeah, I thought that was a beautiful metaphor, and I was curious how you first encountered the world of kind of intentional community or eco-village, and how you intuited that this was a powerful wave to ride?
I didn't intuit that it was a wave to ride. I came up with that metaphor after I saw that my book had really taken off and started getting translated into other languages, and I began to get asked to come and be a consultant. Okay, so how did I first get into it? My mother and I moved to Fort Collins, Colorado in 1991 from California, where we had been living. And there were people starting communities there in the Fort Collins area and all up and down the Front Range and really all over Colorado. And I get curious and interested in, how do you do this? What is the method? Is there a book out there that tells you, here's what works? There was not. There was paragraphs here and there in different books about what somebody learned when they started this community or started that community. So my friend Daniel, who moved to Boulder, Colorado, from the same Bay Area where we both lived and we were friends, he was in Boulder and I was in Fort Collins, and why wasn't I in Boulder? Couldn't afford it. But anyway, Fort Collins is a very cool town, too. And we started a newsletter called Growing Community. And one of his friends kindly gave us a grant to get it started. And it was a physical newspaper. I mean, it was a newsletter on paper. This was that long ago, early 90s. And so we used journalism as forcing function. I'd go learn a bunch of stuff by calling up folks and going to visit them, at first in the Front Range of Colorado and later all over the country. And my friend Dan edited it and did the graphics and laid it out because he had all those skills. And then I found out Communities Magazine was seeking an editor, so I applied for the job and I showed them the newsletters and I said, I already know how to edit, and I knew how to edit even though Dan edited me. So I got the job working for Communities Magazine, and I folded the newsletter and its subscribers into the magazine so that I wasn't, leaving anybody in the lurch. And my education began even more by reading all the articles that we did run and that we did not, and by visiting the communities where the Fellowship for Intentional Community, which is the publisher of the magazine, they would have board meetings, and I, as their employee, would go to them. And they had funds to fly all of us there and put us up, because the community that they held the board meeting in would put us up. And so I got to learn a lot from the founders of those communities by asking them, and I was just like this relentless inquirer, trying to be courteous and polite, but still like, and then what happened? What did you do then? And what did you learn from that? And I was kind of possibly a little bit obnoxious, I hope not.
So
Anyway, I had a great time learning things, and a shocking, stunning, painful time learning things, because that's when I learned, holy mackerel, things can go very wrong. What I learned from all the forming communities in Colorado, and then later in the whole country, was only about 10% succeeded, and they did certain real clear specific things, which I thought, I see a pattern here. And then about 90% failed. And what was painful and shocking for me and just hurt in the heart was that they often failed in dreadful conflict between the founders. And sometimes they ended up in lawsuits in a court where they were duking it out with their hard gladiator lawyers. And they had wanted to be friends and communities doing harmony and living the way I now live in this current paradise that I live in. And they didn't get to, at least not at that time. Sometimes it was so stunning and shocking and traumatic, they never wanted to hear the C word again. They were soured on the whole idea. I think that's the right word. And so what happened next in terms of my evolution towards answering your very big question is that I got asked by a permaculture teacher in Colorado to trek with my truck up over the Rockies and then down again to go to where he lived in Carbondale at the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute.
We know it.
Crimpy.
Yeah.
Jerome Osentowski,
Yeah.
first permaculture teacher I ever met, and
Wow.
my permaculture teacher back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerome says, come on over here, Diana, and teach 2 sessions on community for my 2-week permaculture course.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, what do I know? It was like really a long time ago, and I'd only been being the editor for a little bit, you know. And when I got there and taught my 2 sessions, I was astonished at how much I knew.
Yeah.
People asked me things, and I just had information
Yeah.
that came from all those writers that wrote articles for Communities
Yeah.
Magazine and all those
Yeah.
people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, I thought maybe I could teach workshops.
Right.
You know, it was Jerome that helped me see that I could
Right.
teach, and that he said, you know, you're really a good teacher. And I said, really? I've never taught anything before in my whole life. I don't even know how. I have no. Blah, blah. And he said, no, really. And he told me the things that I did that were good teaching, and I thought,
Wow.
something cool I can do. Well, that's great, because I grew up having no skills or talents whatsoever, as far as I could tell. Perhaps that is a trait of people who are destined to one day be writers. You know, they don't know. They're a little kid. What do they know that they might do well?
Mm-hmm.
I was bad at bicycling, skating, tetherball, and other kid things. I had no idea what I was going to do. So I started teaching workshops, and then I thought, you know, I think I should just. Oh, I know what happened. I got asked by some people in Europe to edit a book on how to reduce conflict in ecovillages.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read the chapters that had been compiled, this was so long ago, the manuscript was physically mailed to me, and it was a whole bunch of papers
Wow.
typed on typewriters or sometimes computers with different type. And I looked at it and I thought, none of these things are relevant to how you reduce conflict or prevent it.
Mm-hmm.
What you need are these 6 things. And I told it to a friend at a truck stop near Loveland, Colorado, where we were having some coffee. And I grabbed the truck stop napkin and said, look, you need these 6 things. And I made this little circle with 6 pie-shaped parts. You need a clear vision and purpose. You need a clear and thorough membership process. You need to have people help be accountable for their agreements. You need a very clear, fair, and participatory decision-making method where somebody's not the boss.
Right.
And I was just telling my friend this, and my friend picks up the napkin and says, you got to write this down. And I said, you should write a book. I don't know how to write a book. And then this giant finger in the universe, you know that finger where you say, somebody ought to?
Yeah.
The finger swivels around, points at me, and in a giant voice says, you can write this book. You should write this book. And I said, I don't know how to write a book.
Yeah.
And the gigantic universe, so to speak, says to me, well, you know how to write a magazine article.
Yeah.
Just do a bunch of them in a row. And I wrote a book that's become one that people cite as being the foundational book they have used or want to use. Or sometimes people in communities ask everybody in the group, and they're forming a group, to read the book.
Right. I can imagine. Yeah.
And study it, you know, one chapter a week and things like that. They tell me this, and I think it's due to all those people I interviewed.
Yeah.
It's due to my landing on the surfboard at the right time.
Definitely. You being like the vessel to express and put into form this important like manual, which is only going to be more and more important, I feel, like moving ahead. You know, and so I want to get into like some specific questions about your expertise, but before I do that, I've heard community be talked about as like a nutrient. And one thing, and I think you might have mentioned that, and I think I've heard it from a man named Arthur Haynes up in Maine and some others. And, you know, we had already mentioned this briefly, but I really love human deep history and knowing where we come from.
Me too!
Yay!
Me too.
Awesome! Yeah. And that can inform us, because that's what our biology is like responding to. Our modern society is such a new invention that we haven't been able to catch up to that. And shouldn't biologically, and so it sort of vibrates against what we know. And so that's one thing, a way I try to communicate the necessity of community to other people that I meet, because it's think a lot of people think about it and they think it's just like this new age hippie thing, and you know, and it frustrates me because I see it as fundamentally necessary for us to go through this collective shift, so we don't destroy the planet and ourselves in the process, and we can actually get back to like being human and expressing our true gifts and living to our fullest potential. So from your expertise and your time in community and studying community, what have we been missing being in this sort of world of separation and this industrial, individualized society, rat race? What have we been missing? And then what do we gain by finding community again? You know, so just for those who might think community is like a distant or not something that they may not consider, you know?
Well, I love how you're thinking, and as I mentioned to you, I loved what I read on your website about your mission and your vision and what you hope to do and why. I'd say we are twins separated at birth, perhaps. I don't know how our mom managed to have 40 years between us, but you know, you never know about things. Okay, so I think nutrient is a wonderful, you know, basic amino acid, you know, or vitamin that everyone needs. It's a wonderful metaphor. And the metaphor that I used to use until I thought, this is probably actually true, is that I think people are genetically programmed to live in groups of people. And we grew that way through eons of evolutionary development, I think. And so I think it feels really good and natural to have a group of friends that you really like and some of whom you love, who feel like brothers and sisters and cousins, and you can count on them. And there's this mutually flowing flow of goodwill as you help each other with lots of things. Some communities have that, and it seems to me that our community, Earthaven, has that now, though not earlier, very much. And some communities have lots of conflict, and they're not having that to the degree that they may have later when they learn more about how to do this thing. So to answer what have we been missing and what do we need, I'd like to use the concept of basic universal human needs, which didn't start with Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication, but which he shared widely, and now I sort of look at the world that way. I think we humans have a need for a feeling of connection and belonging, and a feeling of contributing to the shared common good. That feels really good to contribute. I think we have a need to be seen and heard, and like, oh, I know who you are, and you know who I am. I can absolutely feel that my friends at Earthaven, and especially my closer neighbors and closer friends, they sort of know all about me. And it's fine. It's not weird or embarrassing. Well, it might have been at first, but I got used to that. You just known, and that feels good. And me, they, you know. And I think people need to feel accepted and appreciated, acknowledged, respected, and artfully and diplomatically corrected when they're messing up by friends who care about them and are willing to take the time, you know.
Feedback.
Feedback. And so I think people in mainstream culture might be missing that without knowing what it is they're missing. And so who it is that responds to Earthaven well, responds positively, and I suspect who it is in other countries and with other eco-village places, are people on what I call, in my mind, the green growing edge. So let's say you could picture all of, say, American culture, but I'd like to say North American culture, because I always sort of think of Canada and the U.S. as our North American continent, full of people who are quite similar in culture and so on. It seems to me there are people like Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street, who are predatory, probably sociopathic, dog eat dog, I want to win over you and get the most money I can get. And it seems to me there are regular middle class and working class and suddenly newly poor people from both economic places who just want to get through life, just want to make sure the kids are all right, make sure they have enough food and they can pay the rent or the mortgage, and they might feel like desperate wage slaves in a job that's not fulfilling, but they've got to do it because there's the medical insurance, and then there's Johnny's special needs, and we need medical insurance for that. And I think that this is very, very hard. But I think that it's hard in a way that people who don't know anything else may not know that there's something else, because it just looks like life, right? Looks and feels like life.
Exactly.
I think there are some people who have the privilege of time and energy to find out if there are any alternatives. And I think a lot of people have no interest in ecological or green or shared community-ish things, and others are sort of saying, what is that now? And that ecological issues and sustainability and a desire to do something to help the planet and to help ourselves and to help our own health. And the desire to connect with people more in community. I think those are sort of parallel awakenings in a lot of people. And they don't know there's such a thing as an eco-village or a place like this. But then they, at some point, like yourself, Hayden, start looking it up online. My best friend at Earthaven was a fiscal analyst for the North Carolina State Legislature, a lawyer with lots of financial information. Her husband was a college professor of library science, and they lived a fairly nice life with two incomes from two professionals in Durham. And they started to get interested in this kind of thing. They'd been environmentalists their whole adult lives, married lives. And her husband, was on a computer in the living room, and she was on a computer in another room, and they were trying to look up, is there anybody who's doing this kind of life? And they were using keywords in YouTube and keywords in Google and trying to figure it out. At the same time, they both stumbled upon Earthaven, which is only a 4-hour drive to the west from where they were living. And they both went, click, looking up the different pages and reading it, and going, oh my God, this is right here in our very own state. Look what they're doing, look how they're doing. And they both walked into the other room to meet the other one.
Wow.
And they meet in the doorway and say, honey, there's this place. Hey, I saw this place. They said that at the same time in the doorway. And then they became members and moved here.
Amazing.
And they were on the green growing itch. And I think that their story is very, very similar to a lot of people who right now would love to know about this kind of thing. And by the way, there are urban eco-villages. I think you probably know that, but there are. And so one needn't leave one's job and one's whole way of life to live more like this.
I agree. It's like this need for, is beautiful by the way, and there's this need for living symbols, that can help like, because I feel like many people have a felt sense that something is off.
Yes.
Something is wrong with the way that life is right now, and why am I just like struggling to get by? And does it have to be this way? But there's not any living symbols of another way, and so it just seems like a void to step out of what they know. And so that seems more terrifying than to endure, in some, for many, I feel.
I love the way you're putting it, which I think is real central to your work with your Seeds organization. Which is that I think there's a felt sense something's missing. I think the same thing. And, for some people, feeling what's missing seems, that's obvious. What we should do is just earn more money and buy more things. It's that vacation home. We'd really be happy if we had that vacation home. Oh, it's getting the second car that's really quite fancy. That would really make us happy. Oh, it's having more children, or it's having children at all, or it's moving to such a rather cool place. And, you can't blame people for thinking things like that. Everything in Western culture teaches us that
Right.
that's what we should want, and that's going to be the cure.
Mm-hmm. Right, this kind of consumptive cure to fill something that's deeper than that. I'm curious in terms of you talk about how the need for intentional communities, and like we're saying, is there's a drive for something that doesn't exist in predominant culture. We're curious about how you help support people, because they are coming from predominant cultures, so they may be looking for something different, but to support them in not replicating sort of the wounds or the ways of being that they have been impacted by living in our predominant consumptive culture.
Do you mean after they become members?
As they are also trying to form community in the process.
Oh, people starting communities and or joining them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How do we...
So like a deprogram. How do we deprogram, what we've been taught, this hierarchical separation, egocentric way of being, and move towards more egalitarian consensus, or these ecocentric that are ways that are kind of foreign. Have you seen a method that like works, or does everyone sort of come up with their...
Well, this is really a good question, and I have to think about it. So give me a sec to gather my wits. Okay, so I don't think that any communities, or if there are, I don't know of any, that have an actual formal program called Let Us Disabuse You of some of those mainstream notions, or Let Us reprogram you into eco-land.
Right.
But communities do have orientation periods for incoming new members.
Yeah.
And they have periods of provisional membership or exploring membership where, if they're really well organized, and I suggest they do this, that they teach the incoming person things.
Right. Yes.
So here at Earthaven, we teach people what permaculture design is and how we apply it. What nonviolent communication is and how to get a little bit familiar with it, so that you are learning how to look at other people in terms of what are they feeling and needing, and look at yourself, what am I feeling and needing, and reduce the amount of critical and hurtful speech, replacing it with speech that helps to create more connection, not less. Okay, so we teach them how our governance works and how to do our special modified consensus process in our meetings. Let's see, what else? We ask that the person get to know everyone in the community. We ask that they come to more than half of our bi-monthly business meetings for the whole group, and that they join or work for and or sit in on various committees to see what Earthaven's doing for how we organize our work tasks through our governance structure, which is committees and the whole business meeting together. That's our structure. Okay, so when people live here over time, because we ask people to be a provisional member from 6 months to 18 months, or at least that's how we used to do it, and I think we still do, but possibly that's in transition now. But the idea is the longer that you live in a culture, meeting all the time with your neighbors and friends, and interacting in committees and work parties and getting to know the way of life, the more you teach yourself by being immersed in that. It's a little bit like learning a language by total immersion.
Right.
You go live in France, and after a while, you are speaking a little bit, and then after a while, you're understanding a little more, and so on. So this is a bit of a total immersion into this way of life. We have to help people learn things. Like, we're all downstream from each other, so whatever you do affects others of us, so don't just do something unilaterally. Check first to see if it's okay. Sometimes it takes people a while to learn that one.
Definitely.
Because they're not used to that, We have to help people know the things your kids do can really affect us. So you have to let them know what does and doesn't work here, what our agreements are. So some people manage to learn this by osmosis and or just observing, and they have a mentor or a buddy that helps them learn things, and they ask questions, and we have somebody called a sponsor, and the sponsor helps them learn. And maybe sometime they lived here as a person renting, and we call those people new roots, because maybe the root will sprout and then we'll get the whole tree, someday. And so we help new roots with monthly check-ins. I have a new root handout booklet. Then when a person's applying for membership, they have to apply. They can't just be a member. We have to say yes. And they also get a handbook. And so we are in the education business for our new incoming people and for our new roots and for our work exchangers. So there's a lot of learning going on all the time, but it's so organically built into the whole culture that it doesn't look like a special program. We had a couple that came here who were environmental activists from the city, and they hadn't lived in a rural place like this before, where people have to make a living doing the best they can. They had extremely rigorous environmental criteria for how people ought to be, should be, and ought to be and should be. Notice those words. They were quite critical of how we weren't cool enough. We weren't ecologically rigorous enough. The man would ask us questions that I later came to think of as passive-aggressive questions. Like, let's say I said to you, well, how do you go through life wearing black shirts like that? I mean, do you get a lot of criticism? And you might say, what? My shirt? What about that? I see you're wearing beige again. There's things you can say that you think, well, it sounds like a simple question, but what? The question had a kind of an implied little in it, And the couple was rather appalled with us, but they knew that when they joined us, they'd get us into shape. Well, at the time, we used pure classic traditional consensus, which means anybody can stop a proposal that everyone else wants, or that almost everyone else wants, or enough others want that people are not going to stop it so much as they're going to stand aside and go, well, I don't really want us to do that, but since you all do, well, let's just go ahead. And here's what I think will happen, and I'm going to tell you I told you so. And so, but that's reasonable, right? But we were afraid that this couple, not we, some of us, were afraid that this couple who had very fierce ideas about what they did and didn't want us to do regarding road, food, and agriculture, that they would be full decision-making members, and they would stop us. They went to another community, another rural eco-village, which is considerably more ecologically rigorous than we are. And it was a perfect fit. That community was doing the things they wished we had done. The two things I learned from this is, if we had not had classic traditional consensus at that time, we would have welcomed them warmly. Because we would know they couldn't hurt what most of us wanted to do. They would just be ongoingly frustrated. But we'd have the benefit of all the wonderful things they offered us. So I thought, the issue wasn't they had these exceptionally rigorous ideas by our standards, normal rigor by their standards. The problem was our decision making. It was a problem, but it wasn't very obvious until you really looked at it.
That's interesting.
And the second thing I thought is, we could have saved them grief, and they could have saved us grief, if there was some way to know what your level of ecological rigor fit is with communities. If you could know in advance, do you recycle every single thing? Do you this? Do you that? What are your rules about this? Find out ahead of time.
I love like an inventory. I love that, and then a self-inventory, and then matching. Between community and individual. That's a really cool idea.
If only people seeking community would do that. I made a little chart in my book of finding community about the things you have to see if there's a good match. Is it in an area of the country you want to live in? Is it close to an airport if you need that or not? Is it close to hospitals in the city? Is it close to a job you might get in, or how could you make a living there? Can you afford the joining fee? Can you afford the monthly or quarterly or annual dues and fees? Are there lifestyle choices and values matching yours.
Mm-hmm.
Is there internal community finances matching you? There's income sharing, like Twin Oaks, and independent income, like almost most communities in the U.S.
Mhm.
And both of these have different implications and energies.
Right.
Which one do you want, and do you know that in advance and figure it out?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not sure, visit communities and see what's a good fit.
Exactly.
Match yourself on this little chart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Do you like the people?
Right.
Do they? What are their agreements about children and pets?
Mhm.
Do you have 6 dogs and 5 cats, and it just wouldn't be a good idea?
Right.